Greetings, fellow Bible readers. Welcome to week 18 of our Bible read through. This week, we're dealing with the bulk of the book of First Chronicles, a book of the Bible that focuses in on God's promise to King David to give him a son who would build the house of the Lord. And even though that is ultimately fulfilled by Jesus, there's an intermediate fulfillment by King Solomon, David's son, who builds the temple in Jerusalem. So let's dive in with the details for each day of the readings for this week. On day 1, we look at chapters 7 and 8. And in these chapters, we're still finishing up that series of genealogies of the various tribes of the nation of Israel, tracing the connection between their time at between their founding and the return from exile to Babylon. Now, the 5 tribes that are dealt with in the first chapter of this day's reading are all tribes that were in the northern part of that nation of Israel who had been captured not by the Babylonians, but by the Assyrians before the Babylonians came in. And since those tribes had largely ceased to exist, they had been scattered in that dispersion, and many of them had not come back. There's not as much of a need to record the history and the connections of those people and the people who came back from the exile to Babylon. On day 2, we get chapters 9 through 11. The first chapter there, chapter 9, deals with the connection to the people of Jerusalem, their genealogy, and understandable given the fact that it was from Jerusalem where the exiles to Babylon had come, and it was back to the city of Jerusalem where they returned when they came back from that exile. We also get the story of Saul's suicide again in Scripture. And that story in many ways sums up Saul's rule and sets the stage for David taking over the kingship as a godly king. On day 3, we look at chapters 12 through 14. And in these chapters, we get a highlight and an emphasis on David as a warrior, as a man who, through his battles and his military exploits, gives peace to the nation of Israel. In some ways, it's a picture of what Jesus did, that by Jesus' war against Satan, by destroying the works of the devil, he has given peace and freedom to those who have faith in him. Then on day 4, we take a look at chapters 15 through 17. And in these chapters, 2 of them, an entire 2 chapters, are spent just getting the Ark of the Covenant to the city of Jerusalem. And then the 3rd chapter is that promise that God made to David about one of his sons building a house for the Lord, ultimately fulfilled by Jesus building the church, but in a smaller way fulfilled by Solomon building the temple in the city of Jerusalem. And these 3 chapters, they really help us to grasp that this whole book of First Chronicles, it is about recording history, but it's about recording the religious and spiritual history of that nation of Israel, not so much the physical history of that nation. It records the physical history insofar as it impacts that spiritual history. Then on day 5, we get chapters 18 through chapter 22, verse 1, and you want to include verse 1 of chapter 22 because it goes with that story. And in this section of Scripture, we see that Satan, when he attacks believers, sometimes he attacks at their strongest. Occasionally we can think that Satan goes after our weak areas when he attacks us and tempts us spiritually. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes he goes after our strong points. David was a warrior, a fighter for the Lord. He had accomplished many military exploits, and it's exactly there that Satan attacks him, tempts him to number the fighting men, and in that way take pride in his military prowess as the source of his success in this life. Then on day 6, we pick up with chapter 22, verse 2, and we go through chapter 25. And really day 7, chapters 26 through 28, that fits together with day 6. Those 2 days really focus a lot on David's preparations for the construction of the temple. Even though David was not going to be the one who would build that temple, he was so excited and enthused for the construction of that temple that he spends a great deal of time and effort planning and preparation, getting everything set for the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, so that when Solomon takes over, he can go right to work on building that temple. That's all for this week. We'll see you next week.